My name's Eric. I'm 31. And if you met my dad, you'd probably think he's charming, one of those silver fox types who laughs loud, tips well, and knows everyone at the golf club by name. But growing up with him was like being drafted into a military unit where only one soldier mattered. Everything was about his empire, his goals, his image. My sister, Lauren, figured that out early and kept her head down. I, on the other hand, tried to earn his respect for years, fixing his PowerPoint decks in high school, helping him with bookkeeping in college, even delaying a grad program to stay back and consult during a rough patch in his logistics company. He never said thank you, not once. It's not that I expected a trophy. I don't know. I wanted to matter. Not as his employee, not as the kid, just as a man, as a son. But in Dad's world, you were either useful to his goals or you were clutter. He never hit me, never yelled. He was worse. He'd sigh and say, "You don't get it, Eric." Like I was permanently defective. I didn't realize how much that shaped me until a few months ago, when everything finally cracked. It started with a group text. Classic Dad. No warm-up, no small talk, just, dinner Sunday. Bring financials. That was code for a quarterly review of the family business. I put $150,000 into his company 4 years ago when he wanted to scale quickly before the industry pivoted, and although I had no formal role, I still got looped into these family boardroom dinners. Lauren skipped them without consequence. I didn't have that luxury. Sunday night, I showed up to the house's place, technically, but bought with money I helped secure through my network. The kind of place with a 3-car garage and a wine fridge more expensive than my first car. Dad greeted me with that thin executive smile. He was already seated at the head of the dining table with spreadsheets printed in color and notes scrawled in red pen. I swear he rehearsed these things like earnings calls. My stepmom, Rachel, played hostess, pouring wine and pretending not to exist. Dad barely glanced up. "Nice of you to join," he said. I was 5 minutes early. The meeting was typical, him going line by line through costs, pausing only to nitpick anything he didn't understand. I explained that a delay in international freight was due to port strikes, not mismanagement. He grunted. Then came the comment that started the slide. "You know, I was talking to the accountant," he said casually, tapping his pen, "and I realized you haven't been contributing like you used to. No strategy meetings, no outreach, no hustle. I know you're busy with your startup or whatever, but don't expect a handout when I'm gone. That money is going to someone who actually shows up." My fork stopped halfway to my mouth. There it was, the ultimatum. The classic "my money, my rules" speech, dressed up as tough love. I set my fork down, looked at him, and just said, "Copy that." I didn't argue. I didn't flinch, just nodded like I was taking a note, and I saw it, that flicker of confusion in his eyes. He wasn't used to me not defending myself. I finished my dinner, made polite goodbyes, and left. Didn't even pack leftovers. That night, I stayed up until 3 a.m. running the numbers. I'd never touched the investment. Dad used it as bridge capital to secure a second warehouse lease. The papers were legally airtight, he made sure of that. But I had a clause, a single sentence buried in the shareholder agreement that let me pull the money with 48 hours notice if I felt ethical misalignment. I added it years ago when he insisted I trust him with full voting power. The next morning, I called his operations manager directly and filed the withdrawal. Not a word to Dad. I knew exactly how fast the shockwave would hit. By lunch, the warehouse expansion would be stalled. By the end of the day, 2 vendor accounts would freeze. That night, Lauren texted me asking if I was okay. I just replied, "Perfectly fine." What I didn't expect, what none of us expected, was that the next evening, I'd hear the doorbell ring. And there he was, my father. The man who once said emotions were for people with nothing better to do, standing on my porch with a folded piece of paper and hands that wouldn't stop trembling. He looked smaller, not in a pathetic way, just deflated, like the air had finally leaked out of his ego. "Eric," he said quietly. "Can we talk?" I stared at the paper in his hands. It looked like notebook paper, creased, messy, handwritten. The kind of thing you'd give to a teacher after missing a deadline. For a second, I thought it might be a legal notice. But the way he held it, no, it was something else, something personal. I stepped aside and let him in. Not because I forgave him, but because I needed to see how far this would go, how desperate he'd become. How much damage my truth could do to a man who thought he could own everyone's loyalty with cash and guilt. And what he said next, what he handed me, changed everything I thought I knew about who my father really was. He sat down on my couch like it was unfamiliar territory, which it was. He hadn't visited me in years. Not since I moved out and bought my own place. That always seemed to bother him. Independent men, ungrateful, in his book. He glanced around like he didn't know what to do with his hands, then slowly unfolded the paper. No lawyer language, no business speak, just shaky pen strokes written in all caps at the top, "I owe you an apology." I didn't say anything. I just sat down across from him and waited. He took a breath. "I wrote this on the plane," he began, not looking at me. "Flew to Houston last night. Cancelled the investor pitch." That alone told me how rattled he was. He never cancelled business. He kept reading. "I don't know when it started. Maybe it was when your mom left or when I took that first loan to get the warehouse and told myself I couldn't afford distractions. But somewhere along the way, I stopped seeing you as my son. You became leverage, a line item, a tool. And when tools stopped working, you replaced them. That's how I treated you." I looked at him, and for the first time I didn't feel anger. I felt distance, like I was watching a man grieve someone who hadn't died, but had left all the same. "I told myself I was preparing you for the world," he continued. "That being hard on you would toughen you up. But the truth is, I was afraid. Afraid that if I let my guard down, you'd see how much of this dash," he gestured to the house, "the business, the lifestyle is built on fear, on debt, on deals I can barely hold together anymore. You were the only one who ever challenged me, and that scared me." He handed me the paper, finally. His fingers brushed mine, and they were cold. I looked down. There were smudges where the ink had run, either from his hand or tears. The bottom of the page simply read, "I missed the son I used to have before I turned him into someone who had to protect himself from me." For a long moment, neither of us said anything. Then he leaned forward. "I know I can't fix it with a letter. I know that. But when the accounts froze, when the warehouse stopped moving, and Rachel looked at me like I'd finally gone too far, I realized you were the only one who ever gave me something without strings. And I treated it like a bargaining chip." I studied him. He looked 20 years older than he did just 2 days ago. And the most shocking part, he wasn't trying to spin it. No pitch, no manipulation, just a man asking to be heard. "I'm not asking for the money back," he added quickly. "I came here because I'm sorry. I truly am. And if this is where it ends, if this is the last time we talk, then at least you'll know that I finally saw what I did." My heart was pounding. I hadn't prepared for this. I expected rage, threats, guilt-tripping. But this was the one move I didn't expect from him, humility. I leaned back in my chair, still holding the paper. "You think this changes everything?" I asked, not accusingly, just trying to understand him. He shook his head. "No, I think it changes something. Or at least I hope it does." I wanted to believe him. I wanted to take that letter, fold it into my past, and tell myself this was closure. But there was still a part of me that remembered every time he ignored my birthday because he had a client dinner. Every school project he dismissed. Every moment he called me soft for wanting a different kind of life. That damage doesn't vanish with ink. But still, I could feel the air shift. Then my phone buzzed. A single notification. It was a wire transfer receipt from the business account, $150,000 sent back with a note, "No more debts between us." I looked at him. "I'm not asking for forgiveness," he said again. "I'm just trying to give back what I took." And that's when the knock came. 3 sharp raps at the door. My stomach sank. He turned, confused. I already knew who it was. I opened the door, and standing there in a slate gray trench coat and patent leather heels was Cassandra Fields, my father's general counsel. She was sharp, meticulous, and utterly fearless, the kind of person who didn't knock unless the house was on fire or someone was about to get burned. Her eyes flicked from me to my dad, who was still seated, still looking smaller than I'd ever seen him. She raised an eyebrow. "Eric," she said coolly, "I assume you've seen the report." "No," I replied. "Not yet." She let out a short breath through her nose and stepped inside without being invited. That was Cassandra, always in control. She pulled a folded document from her bag, slid it onto my kitchen counter, and said, "Internal audit flagged it this morning. Backdated invoices. Ghost vendors. Inventory never received." Dad stood up. Cast dash, but she didn't look at him. "You signed off on every one of them, Gordon. We cross-checked timestamps. Your initials are all over the ledger." He froze. "That's not what it looks like, dash." "Oh, I know what it looks like," she snapped, finally turning to him. "It looks like a CEO funneling operational funds through shell accounts to pad margins and then using Eric's investment as a buffer when quarterly numbers didn't add up." The words landed like punches. I felt the blood drain from my face. He opened his mouth, but nothing came out. I stepped forward. "Wait, are you saying my money, dash?" She nodded. "Was never used for the lease. It was used to cover a shortfall from an over-leveraged contract in Q2. One we now suspect was fabricated. There's more. But the board wants to speak to you, Eric." Tonight, my father sat down again, heavier this time. I didn't. "It wasn't supposed to, dash," Cassandra ignored him. "They want to know how much you knew. Whether you were complicit or just collateral damage." I couldn't speak. I couldn't breathe. Because somewhere in the back of my mind, I always believed he was ruthless, selfish, controlling. But this wasn't just manipulation. It was fraud. Cassandra turned to me, her voice softer. "Now, you can help clean this up, or you can walk away. But either way, you'll need to decide fast. Legal's already circling." She handed me a flash drive. "Evidence, backup logs, names. You'll want to review it." Then, without waiting for a reply, she walked out. The door clicked shut like a gavel falling. I stood there, staring at my father. He looked up at me with hollow eyes. "Eric, I didn't mean for this to happen." I was shaking from rage, from betrayal, from the weight of every decision that had led us here. "You looked me in the eye," I said slowly, "and told me not to expect a dime while you were draining every dollar I gave you just to keep your illusion alive." He didn't answer, just dropped his face into his hands. Silence stretched between us, and then something inside me snapped. Not in anger, not even in grief. It was a final break, a clean cut. I picked up the flash drive. My hands had stopped trembling. This wasn't just about revenge anymore. It was about exposure, about legacy, and about whether I was going to be remembered as the silent son in the background or the one who finally ended the cycle. I opened my laptop. I slid the flash drive into the side port, my mind still echoing with Cassandra's words: ghost vendors, fabricated contracts. My father had taken my trust, my investment, and used it like a patch over a festering wound in his empire. I always thought he was arrogant, controlling, maybe even cold, but I never thought he'd risk a felony just to keep the illusion of being the guy who always wins. As the folders loaded on screen, I sat down across from him. He hadn't moved. His hands were still covering his face like a kid waiting for a punishment he already knew was coming. The screen lit up, folder names, dates, document trails. Cassandra wasn't bluffing. There were PDF invoices labeled Vendor Logistics A3. But when I clicked them, I noticed something strange. The formatting was identical. Every line item, every total, even the typos. Whoever created them had copied a template and reused it, just changing the names and dollar amounts. I opened a spreadsheet marked Internal Review Gordon Authorization. It was a log of signatures, 37 entries in 3 months, all initialed with GM in the margin. Some were dated on weekends. Some during conferences I knew he was attending in a different time zone. And one of them, one I'll never forget, was dated the exact day he took me to lunch to reconnect. The day he looked me in the eye and said he wanted us to rebuild trust. The day I almost believed him. I turned to him. "You forged some of these," I said flatly. "Didn't you?" He didn't look up. "I trusted you with more than money," I said. "You weren't just my father. You were my mentor, my example. And all this time you were padding losses with fake numbers and dragging me into it like some dumb insurance policy." His voice was small. I thought I could fix it before anyone found out. I stood up. "You mean you thought you could hide it? That you'd die before the damage hit the surface and someone else would clean up the mess?" "No," he said sharply. "I thought I could make it right before you hated me." The silence was so loud it buzzed. I grabbed my keys. He looked up suddenly. Where are you going? To the board. Eric, please let me come with you. Let me explain. You've explained enough, I said. Now I'm going to tell my side. He stood up like he wanted to stop me, but then he hesitated. For the first time in my life, my father looked afraid. I walked to the door and paused. You once said not to expect a dime, I said, turning halfway back. But you know what? I wasn't looking for money. I was looking for a father who didn't treat people like pawns. He didn't follow me. He just sat back down on my couch, crumpled, alone. And I walked out into the night, into the war I never asked for, but now had no choice but to fight. When I stepped into that boardroom an hour later, everything changed. The boardroom was colder than I remembered. Not the temperature, just the air. Still clinical, the kind of space designed to make power feel permanent. I stepped inside and was greeted not with handshakes, but with clipped nods and darting eyes. There were 8 people at the long table, 4 executives I'd known since my 20s, 2 outside counsel, Cassandra seated beside the chair reserved for the acting board chair. And at the far end, an empty seat, my father's. I didn't take his chair. I wasn't here to replace him. I sat on the other side, placed the flash drive on the table, and said only one thing to start. I'm not here to protect him. The room went still again. The man to Cassandra's left, Peter Rollins, CFO, cleared his throat. Story number 2. I recently scam called my scam callers and it got them to stop. They were calling 10 to 15 times a day, each time spoofing a US-based location, and had the exact same voicemail, which has caused me to need to delete my entire voicemail inbox 3x weekly for at least a year. Extremely frustrating. So many calls during work meetings, important moments with friends, etc. Every single time, the same voicemail message. This is Jennifer from the senior underwriting team calling about your loan. I found Reddit post about this specific scam, and in one comment a guy claimed to have scam called them back and it got them to stop. So I decided, what the heck, let me see if this works. I called, put myself on mute, and hung up after 5 to 10 seconds of them talking. I did this exactly 266 times in 35 minutes. Each time to the same number. I cycled through 20 to 30 employees with accents from Australia to India to Mid-Atlantic, at least 3 different company names they claimed to be from, and many scripts. Sometimes they'd start one script then mess up and start on another. Other times they'd just say hello. The best was when they changed mid-script what company they were claiming to be from. Then sometimes they'd say hello Mr. Boop. After about 150 calls, I started getting intermittently hung up on immediately after they answered the call. I knew I was getting to them. Finally, at call 260, I reached the final fucking boss. In a deep, mob boss type voice, I hear, and I kid you not, Mr. Boop, you've gotta stop with these spam calls. I mean, seriously, you gotta have something better to do with your time. This happened Thursday and I'm still riding the high.